Time now for an in-depth look at the market news this afternoon, and for that I'm joined on the line by Dr. Jun-sok, professor of economics at the Catholic University of Korea. Professor Young, thank you for making time today.
Happy to be here.
Well, U.S. stocks ended Friday mixed, but mostly higher. Korean shares strongly higher today as well, despite the rising tensions between Washington and Beijing. Tell us about the global markets and the Korean financial markets in particular.
Okay, well, the real economy seems to be undergoing a pretty much dark stage right now, not only because of the coronavirus, but because of the riots that are going on in the United States. But the stock markets, for the most part, doesn't seem to reflect that. U.S. had a very good last week. The Dow went down a little bit at Friday. Dow, S&P, and NASDAQ rose for most of the last week. And again, it does not seem to have been affected by the escalation of U.S.-China trade war or the news that the recovery from coronavirus is likely to last until 2021. It's probably due to optimism over the economy opening up, getting out of the shutdown. But still, we'll have to see this week whether the riots that are happening in the United States will affect the U.S. stock markets. Asian markets, again, were mostly good today, except possibly Hong Kong. Nikkei went up most of last week, except Friday when it went down a little bit, but it went back up today. China was up most of last week and today. And as I said, Hong Kong it was down most of the last week, but it actually went up a little bit today. So Asian markets had a fairly good day today. And as you mentioned, Korea Kospi, after leveling off for most of late last week, it rose today by 1.75%. Kosdaq also continued the rising trend that it began on Thursday, and it went up today by 3.09%. So even though the news in the real economy hasn't been really that good, stock market seems to be having a positive momentum of its own.
Well, now we saw Korea's exports way down for a third month in a row. Imports down also, though, in part because of the plunge in oil prices. So we are back in a surplus. The trade minister today said he sees a recovery down the road. Tell us about that.
Okay, well, in a sense, Korean trade in May did stage a mini comeback. If you look at just the 10 days, May 1st to May 10th, the exports had fallen by 46.3%. But if you look at the figures for the entire May today, it fell by 23.7%. Now, falling by 23.7% obviously is not a good number. But still, compared to the 46.3% fall that we had for the first 10 days, it seems like it did recover toward the latter part of May, and similar story can be told on imports. Now, the reason that we had a very sudden drop of 24.6% in April and the 23.7% in May is probably due because, well, the Western economy, the U.S., EU, and Japan, they all had a shutdown and lockdown starting in April, and that came very suddenly. So Korean trade fell very suddenly as well. But China from May is returning more or less to normality. So if you look at trade to China, it's only 2.8% down from last May. All the other regions, the U.S., it's down 29.3%, EU down 25%, and ASEAN is down 30%. So one of the reasons why Korean exports did seem to recover toward the end of the month was that China was returning to normality. Most of the export items are firmly in the negative. Automobiles down 54%, automobile down 66%, petrochemicals down 69%. That's partially because the price of oil has fallen so much, but also because the volume of exports has fallen as well. But there's slight good news. Semiconductor exports rose by 7%, computers by 83%, and biohealth items went up by 59%. And also another point is that even though it's a bit of a recessionary surplus, the Korean trade account returned to a surplus. And that's important at this point because the global financial markets are very nervous. Korea is increasing its government deficit and debt because we increased spending, tried to get out of the coronavirus recession. And there's a lot of countries which are in danger of going into a currency crisis. So if Korea had continued getting a trade deficit, that might have given some nervous signals to international investors. But even though it's a recessionary surplus due to falling exports, but even greater falling imports, still having a surplus is a slight bit of a good news.
Well, Professor, we're almost out of time, but real quick, what's coming up this week? We have President Moon talking about the Korean New Deal, also data coming up on consumer prices.
Okay, well, big news there is that government GDP growth forecast is positive 0.1%. That's slightly less than KDI's estimate of 0.02% positive, and a lot more than the Bank of Korea estimate of minus 0.2% growth. And we will have the European Central Bank monetary policy speech coming up, and the latest U.S. unemployment rate and wage data coming up this week. So those will show us roughly how the global economy is doing.
All right, Professor Yang, we'll have to leave it there for today. Thanks so much for sharing your insights.
Thank you.